The men came at dawn, black SUVs with no plates, stopping in front of a farm everyone believed was forgotten. They said they were federal agents. They weren't. And they didn't come to ask questions. They came to collect a secret that was never meant to surface again. Hidden deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, a former Navy SEAL thought he had escaped the war by buying a cursed piece of land and living quietly with his German shepherd. But when that dog uncovered a buried bunker beneath an old grain shed, the past tore itself free. Inside were classified military files, Cold War equipment, and a final letter from a government intelligence officer who discovered a betrayal so dangerous it erased him from history. What followed was not justice, it was pursuit. A gunfight in the forest, shadows moving through trees, a dog fighting in silence, and a truth powerful enough to destroy lives or rebuild them. This is a story about secrets, loyalty, and what a broken soldier chose to build instead of revenge. Before we begin, tell us where you're listening from, or simply write Amen for everyone who needs strength tonight. And if stories of courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable bonds move you, please subscribe and stay with us until the end. Ethan Carter did not come back to the Blue Ridge Mountains to start over. He came back to disappear. At 36, he carried himself like a man older than his years, broad-shouldered, compact, the kind of build forged by repetition and discipline rather than vanity. His hair was cut short, uneven now that no one cared to keep it regulation, dark strands already threaded with premature gray. A trimmed beard framed a jaw set by habit more than anger, and his eyes, steel-colored, observant, permanently scanning, belonged to someone who had learned the hard way that silence could be more dangerous than noise. The war had left its marks where no one could see them. PTSD wasn't a word Ethan liked to use. To him, it was simply the cost of knowing too much and trusting too little. The farm sat at the edge of a narrow gravel road deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, where fog lingered longer than it should, and cell signals faded without warning. The bank had foreclosed on it years ago. No one wanted it. The locals said the land was cursed, whispered that the wealthy family who once owned it vanished in the late 1990s. No bodies, no arrests, no answers. Just gone. When Ethan signed the papers, the realtor hesitated before shaking his hand as if proximity alone might pass something on. The farmhouse itself sagged with age. White paint peeled in long, curling strips, exposing weather-darkened wood beneath. The porch leaned slightly forward, like an old man bracing himself before standing. A rusted weather vane creaked overhead, and the windows stared blankly at the hills beyond, their glass clouded with decades of dust. To anyone else, it was a ruin. To Ethan, it was quiet. Quiet enough that his thoughts could finally slow down. The only creature who seemed to approve immediately was Rex. Rex was a 6-year-old German shepherd, sable-colored with a black saddle and alert amber eyes that never stopped working. His ears were permanently upright, scarred at the edges from old training mishaps, and his movements were precise even when relaxed. He was lean, powerful, and disciplined, the kind of dog that didn't bark without reason. Rex had served as a K-9 alongside Ethan during his last deployments, trained to detect explosives, track human scent, and hold position under fire. They had survived things together that neither spoke about anymore. If Ethan was the last man standing, Rex was the reason he didn't fall. On their first night at the farm, Rex paced the perimeter for nearly an hour, nose low to the ground, cataloging the unfamiliar smells: rotting wood, wild animals, rusted metal, old oil. When he finally lay down at the foot of Ethan's bed, his back to the door, Ethan slept for the first time in weeks without waking to phantom gunfire. The town nearest the farm barely qualified as one. A single gas station, a diner with cracked vinyl booths, and a post office that doubled as a gossip hub. Ethan went there once a week for supplies, never staying longer than necessary. People noticed him anyway. They always did. Sarah Whitman noticed him first. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with auburn hair usually tied back in a practical ponytail. Her skin was lightly freckled from years spent outdoors, and her posture carried the quiet authority of someone used to handling responsibility without complaint. She ran the diner with the efficiency of a woman who had learned not to waste energy on what she couldn't change. When Ethan first walked in, mud on his boots and Rex waiting obediently outside, Sarah didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. She simply watched, taking him in. "You're the one who bought the Carter place," she said, sliding a mug of black coffee across the counter without asking how he took it. Ethan nodded once. "That's what they tell me." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the mountains, then back to him. "Most people don't last up there." "I'm not most people." That earned him the smallest hint of a smile. Sarah didn't press further. People in towns like this learned when silence was a courtesy. Others were less polite. A man named Frank Miller, thick-necked and perpetually red-faced, muttered loud enough for Ethan to hear that only a fool would buy land soaked in bad luck. Frank had once worked for the old owners, back when the place still had money flowing through it. His bitterness clung to him like the smell of cheap whiskey. Ethan ignored him. He had faced worse than words. Back at the farm, days fell into a simple rhythm. Ethan repaired broken fences, cleared brush, replaced rotting boards one at a time. Rex followed him everywhere, sometimes helping by dragging away debris, sometimes simply watching. The work was physical and honest. It kept Ethan grounded. The mountains loomed quietly around them, indifferent to his past, uninterested in his rank or medals. That suited him just fine. Still, there was something about the place that never fully relaxed him. At night, the wind moved strangely through the trees, carrying sounds that felt almost deliberate. The farmhouse settled and groaned like it was remembering things. Rex would occasionally lift his head, ears forward, listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. Not alarmed, just attentive. Ethan trusted that reaction more than any superstition the locals clung to. One afternoon, as Ethan hauled planks toward the old grain shed, he noticed fresh tire tracks near the edge of the property, too recent to ignore. Rex sniffed them, then looked up at Ethan, tail stiff. Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct that had kept him alive more times than he could count. He memorized the tracks, filed them away. Whoever it was hadn't come to the house. Yet. The farm wasn't welcoming him. It was watching him. As the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the field, Ethan leaned against the fence he'd just repaired and looked out over the land. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in cause and effect, in choices and consequences. Whatever had happened to the family who vanished decades ago, it wasn't the mountain's doing. Rex sat beside him, solid and warm, a living reminder that loyalty didn't need explanations. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's head, fingers brushing the familiar scar near his ear. "This'll do," Ethan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The farm no one wanted had found its new owner. And somewhere beneath the quiet, something old and unfinished waited patiently. The grain shed had been standing longer than anyone remembered, a squat wooden structure with a corrugated tin roof that sagged in the middle like a tired spine. Ethan worked there in the late afternoon, sleeves rolled up, forearms streaked with dust and old grease, replacing rotten planks one by one. The smell inside was a mix of mold, dried grain, and rust. Nothing unusual for a place this old. Nothing, at least, that should have mattered. Rex thought otherwise. The German shepherd stopped pacing and froze near the center of the shed. His ears locked forward, tail stiff and low, muscles tightening under his sable coat. This wasn't the alert Rex showed for deer or raccoons. This was focused, deliberate. His nose moved in short, precise bursts, tracing a path along the floorboards as if following an invisible line only he could see. Ethan straightened slowly, every instinct sharpening. "What is it, buddy?" Ethan asked quietly. Rex didn't look back. He began to paw at the ground. The floorboards were warped and brittle, some already loose from decades of moisture. Rex scratched at one seam, then another, snorting as dust puffed into the air. His movements were methodical, not frantic. Ethan had seen this posture before, outside Fallujah, in abandoned compounds when Rex had alerted on something buried and dangerous. The same stillness, the same certainty. Ethan dropped to one knee and pressed a hand to the floor. Beneath the wood, the vibration felt wrong, too solid, too deliberate. He grabbed a crowbar from his toolbox and pried up the first plank. It split with a dry crack, exposing compacted dirt and a layer of poured concrete beneath, smooth, unnatural, poured by someone who had planned to keep it hidden. Rex growled low in his chest. "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "I smell it too." They worked together, Ethan levering up broken boards, Rex scraping dirt aside with controlled force. Sweat ran down Ethan's temples, stinging his eyes. As the hole widened, a curved edge emerged, steel, dark with rust but unmistakably shaped by a welder's hand. A hatch, circular, bolted down, then buried. Ethan's pulse slowed. That was the thing about fear. Training taught you how to push past it. He brushed away the remaining dirt until the steel surface was fully visible. There were no markings, no serial numbers, just a recessed handle and a corroded padlock that hadn't been touched in years. "This isn't a cellar," Ethan said, more statement than question. Rex sat back on his haunches, eyes fixed on the hatch, breathing steady. He had done his job. Whatever lay below was now Ethan's responsibility. It took effort to break the lock. The metal groaned, resisted, then snapped with a sharp echo that seemed too loud for the quiet mountains. Ethan paused, listening. Nothing. Just wind moving through the trees outside and the faint creak of the shed settling. He pulled the handle. The hatch opened downward, revealing a ladder bolted into a narrow concrete shaft. Cold air rushed up, stale and metallic, carrying the faint scent of oil and old electronics. Ethan clicked on his flashlight and angled the beam down. The walls were smooth, reinforced. This wasn't something a farmer built on a whim. "Stay," he told Rex. The dog didn't protest. He lay down at the edge, head lowered, watching. Ethan descended slowly, boots hitting the concrete with dull thuds. The space opened into a rectangular room larger than he expected, maybe 20 feet long, 10 wide. The flashlight swept across shelves bolted to the walls, metal cabinets and wooden crates stacked with military precision. No cobwebs, no signs of collapse. Everything was preserved, sealed away like a time capsule meant to be forgotten. He checked for tripwires out of habit, found none. The first cabinet he opened contained binders, thick, black, labeled in block letters that made his stomach tighten. Dates from the late 1980s into the mid-1990s. Classification stamps faded but still legible. Ethan flipped one open and scanned the contents. Operation summaries, surveillance logs, names redacted with heavy black lines. This wasn't stolen paperwork. This was internal, official, the kind of material that never left secure facilities. His light moved to the crates. He pried one open and found radio equipment wrapped in oilcloth, Cold War-era transmitters modified with custom components. Another crate held tracking devices, compact and ahead of their time, the kind he'd only seen in classified briefings early in his career. Whoever assembled this cache had resources and access. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. This place wasn't just owned by someone rich, he said aloud, the words grounding him. It was used. He thought of the stories in town, the family that vanished. No bodies, no answers. He'd assumed money, scandal, maybe a quiet cover-up. But this was something else. A node. A relay point. A safe house masquerading as a farm. A faint scrape echoed above. Ethan snapped his light upward, hand moving instinctively toward a weapon that wasn't there. Rex's silhouette filled the hatch opening, ears forward, eyes reflecting the beam. "It's clear," Ethan said, his voice steady. "You did good." Rex huffed once, tail thumping against the concrete edge. Ethan replaced the lids carefully, just as he'd found them. He didn't touch more than necessary. The rule was simple. Don't disturb a scene until you understand who might be watching. And someone, he was certain, had once watched this place closely. As he climbed back up, the shed seemed different. Smaller, less innocent. Sunlight filtered through the warped boards, dust motes floating lazily, disguising the fact that beneath his boots lay secrets powerful enough to erase lives. Ethan closed the hatch and dragged the broken planks back into place, arranging them as they had been. Rex watched, silently, trusting Ethan's judgment. When they finished, the floor looked untouched to anyone who didn't know where to look. They stepped outside. The mountain stood unchanged, blue and distant, offering no answers. But Ethan felt it now, the pressure, subtle but unmistakable. The sense that by uncovering the hatch, he had crossed an invisible line. Rex paused, nose lifting into the wind. His body tensed again, not at the shed this time, but toward the tree line beyond the field. "What do you hear?" Ethan whispered. Rex didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply stared, locked onto something Ethan still couldn't see. And for the first time since buying the farm, Ethan wondered not what had happened here decades ago, but whether someone else already knew he'd found it. The farmhouse had always felt older inside than it looked from the road, as if time pooled in the corners and refused to move on. That night, after Ethan sealed the grain shed and checked the perimeter twice, Rex refused to settle. The German shepherd paced the living room with controlled impatience, nails clicking softly against the warped hardwood floor. His ears tilted, then fixed, not toward the windows or the door, but toward the far wall where a built-in bookshelf leaned just a fraction out of true. Ethan noticed the angle only because Rex did. "Easy," Ethan murmured, lowering himself into a crouch. Rex's coat caught the lamplight, sable fur darkening along his spine, the old scar near his ear pale against the black saddle. He was 6, but still carried himself like a working dog, alert, precise, economical. He sniffed once, then pressed his nose to the base of the bookshelf and exhaled sharply. Ethan stood, heart steady but attentive. He had lived long enough with Rex to know when curiosity crossed into certainty. The shelf looked ordinary at first glance. Pine wood stained too dark, rows of outdated encyclopedias, ledgers, and a few hard-bound novels with cracked spines. But when Ethan laid his palm against it, the wood felt cooler than the surrounding wall, solid, thicker. He pulled a book at random. It slid out too easily. Behind the shelf, a narrow seam revealed itself, mortar lines that didn't match the rest of the wall. Bricks set with a precision that felt deliberate. Someone had sealed this space not to hide clutter, but to erase evidence. Ethan ran his fingers along the edge, found the catch by instinct, and eased the false panel open. Dust drifted down like ash. The cavity behind the wall was small but deep enough to hold a single object. Inside sat a rectangular tin box, dull gray, edges dented, the lid marked with a faded insignia Ethan recognized instantly. Not a unit patch, not a branch. A domestic intelligence seal that hadn't been used in decades. Rex sat back on his haunches, watching, breathing slow. The room felt tighter now, as if the house itself had leaned closer. Ethan lifted the box and carried it to the table. The hinge protested, then gave. Inside lay folded papers, yellowed with age, and beneath them a map printed on heavy stock. Shenandoah National Park was circled in red ink, a specific section deep in the interior marked with coordinates handwritten in a steady, disciplined script. This wasn't a hiker's map, it was operational. The letter lay on top. Ethan unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, controlled, but the pressure varied, betraying strain. He read in silence, the words settling with the weight of confession. The author identified himself only by initials and rank, enough for Ethan to understand the implication without the vanity of a name. A senior domestic intelligence officer, embedded oversight, counterintelligence. The letter spoke of an internal discovery, An unauthorized network siphoning information, manipulating contracts, selling silence. The betrayal wasn't foreign, it was homegrown. Worse, it was protected. When the officer tried to escalate, the response was containment, surveillance, then pursuit. The farmhouse, the letter explained, had never been a family retreat. It was a dead drop, a relay, chosen for its isolation and its wealth as camouflage. When the net tightened, the officer moved assets here, documents and devices meant to outlive him if he didn't. The last lines were brief, stripped of sentiment. He would not be taken. He would not endanger anyone else. The farm would be erased. History would be rewritten as absence. Ethan lowered the letter. His jaw tightened, not with anger, but recognition. He had seen this pattern before, overseas and stateside alike, the way institutions protected themselves by swallowing their own. The house hadn't been abandoned. It had been buried. Rex rose and crossed the room, pressing his shoulder lightly against Ethan's leg. The contact grounded him. Ethan reached down, fingers threading through the thick fur at Rex's neck. "Good nose," he said quietly. The map demanded attention. Ethan spread it flat, noting the terrain markers, the way the circled area sat far from maintained trails. Shenandoah was vast, but the mark was precise, a destination chosen for concealment and access. He folded the map again and placed it back in the tin, then slid the letter beneath it. He didn't put the box away. Not yet. A knock came at the door. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. 2 measured taps, followed by a pause. Rex's head snapped up, ears forward. Ethan didn't move for a count of 3, then stepped to the window and shifted the curtain just enough to see. Sarah Whitman stood on the porch, shoulders squared against the cool mountain air. Up close, the lamplight showed the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the kind earned by responsibility rather than age. Her auburn hair was loose tonight, falling to her shoulders, catching copper highlights. She wore a denim jacket over a plain sweater, jeans practical and worn at the knees. In one hand, she held a paper bag. Ethan opened the door without fully unlatching the screen. "You all right?" Sarah asked, her voice low, steady. "Your lights were on late. Folks in town noticed." Ethan studied her for a beat. Sarah had a way of looking at people that suggested she noticed what others missed, then chose carefully what to do with it. He nodded once. "Long day," he said. She glanced past him, taking in the room with a quick, practiced sweep. "I brought soup," she said, lifting the bag. "Figured you might not feel like cooking." Ethan stepped aside. "Thanks." She entered, eyes briefly meeting Rex's. The dog regarded her without hostility, tail still. Sarah smiled faintly. "He's protective." "He's honest," Ethan replied. She set the bag on the counter, then hesitated, gaze flicking toward the table where the tin box sat half-hidden beneath a folded cloth. She didn't ask. That restraint told Ethan more than curiosity would have. "They say the place has stories," Sarah said lightly, as if commenting on the weather. "Most of them aren't true." "Most stories aren't," Ethan said. Sarah nodded, accepting the answer. "Be careful, Ethan. People don't like it when old things get stirred up, even if they pretend they've forgotten." She left without another word, the porch light casting her shadow long across the floor before the door closed. Ethan locked it behind her. Rex returned to the wall, nose hovering near the shelf, as if expecting it to open again. Ethan followed his gaze, then looked back at the tin box, the map inside, the letter that refused to stay buried. Outside, somewhere beyond the tree line, an engine turned over and cut off. Ethan killed the lamp and stood in the dark, listening, the letter's final sentence echoing in his mind as Rex growled once, soft, controlled, a warning. The SUVs arrived just after dawn, black shapes sliding up the gravel road without headlights, engines idling low and patient like predators conserving energy. Ethan watched from the kitchen window, coffee cooling untouched in his hand. Rex stood beside him, 6 years old and all business, sable coat bristling slightly along the spine, amber eyes fixed on the vehicles with a focus that had once saved lives in places far from Virginia. The farm was quiet, birds just beginning to stir, fog clinging to the low ground. Nothing about the scene felt accidental. 4 men stepped out. They moved with the confidence of authority, but not the ease. Ethan saw it immediately. The way their shoulders squared too deliberately, the way their hands hovered near their belts as if waiting for permission. Real federal agents wore their confidence lightly. These men wore it like armor. The one who led them was tall and angular, late 40s maybe, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and a jaw that looked permanently clenched. A trimmed beard framed his mouth, neat enough to signal discipline, but worn long enough to suggest a man who liked control without scrutiny. His eyes were pale and calculating, the kind that evaluated before engaging. He wore a windbreaker with a generic agency patch stitched just slightly off-center. Ethan stepped onto the porch before they could knock. He kept his posture relaxed, shoulders loose, weight evenly distributed. Rex stayed just inside the door, visible but restrained, tail still. "Morning," the leader said, flashing a badge that caught the light too quickly. "Federal business. We're here regarding items recovered on this property." Ethan studied the badge without leaning in. "That so?" "Yes, sir. You're Ethan Carter." It wasn't a question. "Depends who's asking." The man smiled thinly. "Special Agent Mark Delaney. We'll need you to hand over anything you've found, documents, equipment, anything unusual, for your own protection." Ethan let the silence stretch. He noticed the way Delaney's men spaced themselves, 2 drifting toward the tree line, 1 lingering near the vehicles. Textbook containment, but executed a half-second too late. Ethan caught the mistake when Delaney cited the authorization, an administrative code that had been retired years ago, replaced after a quiet scandal no one talked about anymore. The kind of detail only insiders knew, or pretenders missed. Ethan nodded slowly. "You've got the wrong code." Delaney's smile didn't falter, but something hardened behind his eyes. "Sir, let's not make this difficult." Rex growled then, low and controlled, the sound barely audible but unmistakable. Delaney glanced at the dog, then back to Ethan. "Beautiful animal," Delaney said. "German Shepherd?" "K9, Ethan replied. "Retired." Delaney's gaze flicked again to the tree line. Ethan felt the shift in the air, the moment where conversation stopped being useful. He stepped back just enough to bring Rex fully into view. "Get off my property," Ethan said quietly. Delaney exhaled through his nose. "That's not going to happen." The first shot came from the left, a suppressed crack swallowed by the trees. It missed by inches, splintering the porch rail. Ethan was already moving, pulling Rex with him as he dove through the doorway and out the back. The farmhouse erupted with the sound of breaking glass as another round punched through the window. They ran. The forest swallowed them quickly, thick underbrush and uneven ground breaking lines of sight. Ethan moved low and fast, years of muscle memory guiding his steps. Rex stayed close, reading Ethan's movements without command. Behind them, voices rose, sharp, urgent, unfamiliar with the terrain. Ethan angled toward a shallow ravine, then doubled back, circling. He knelt briefly, pressing his palm into the dirt, whispering a single word. "Go." Rex vanished into the trees, silent as smoke. The men fanned out, flashlights cutting pale cones through the dim understory. They were trained, but not enough. Not for this. Ethan waited until the nearest man stepped past him, then rose and struck once, clean and efficient, dropping him without a sound. He dragged the body into the brush and moved again. A scream cut the air, short, panicked. Rex's doing. The dog burst from the shadows, teeth flashing, slamming into another man's arm before disappearing again. The attack wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to confuse. And it worked. Delaney shouted orders, his voice tight now, anger bleeding through control. He advanced carefully, weapon up, scanning. Ethan tracked him from above, moving along a rocky incline, the forest muffling every sound. When Delaney paused, Listening, Ethan dropped behind him and drove him forward into the dirt, wrenching the weapon free and pinning him with practiced force. Delaney struggled, strong but unfocused, rage making him sloppy. Ethan ended it quickly, forcing Delaney's face into the earth until the fight drained out of him. Rex appeared at Ethan's side, chest heaving, eyes locked on the downed man. "Easy," Ethan said, hand steady on Rex's collar. Delaney coughed, then laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You always think you're the hero," he spat. "That network never died. It just went underground, waiting." Ethan leaned closer. "Waiting for what?" "For someone like you to open the door." Sirens wailed in the distance. Real ones this time, their cadence unmistakable. Delaney's smile faltered. Ethan stood, pulling Rex back into the trees as blue and red lights began to flicker through the fog. He looked once more at the man in the dirt, the truth settling heavy and cold in his chest. The conspiracy hadn't ended. It had been patient. The morning after the sirens faded, the farm felt different. Not safer, but resolved. Ethan moved through the grain shed with deliberate care, Rex at his heel. The dog's gait relaxed now, yet alert, the way a veteran stands down without forgetting the fight. The false floor went back up easily. The hatch opened again with a familiar weight. Ethan descended, flashlight cutting a clean path through the stale air, and for the first time he allowed himself to inventory everything without rushing. Behind the cabinets and radio crates, tucked where the concrete met a reinforced support beam, he found the boxes. They were plain wooden crates, no markings, sealed with screws instead of nails. Inside lay neatly stacked bearer instruments, government bonds, issued decades ago, unsigned, uncancelled, each wrapped in oil paper and catalogued with careful, methodical notes. The total, once he counted twice, then a third time to be certain, passed $50 million. It wasn't a cache meant for living large, it was a last reserve, designed to survive erasure. Ethan closed the crates and sat on the concrete step, elbows on his knees. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the weight of a choice. He thought of the letter, of a man who had tried to do the right thing and paid for it by being written out of history. He thought of the woods swallowing secrets whole, and the kind of patience corruption relied upon. Rex nudged his hand, a gentle insistence. Ethan scratched behind the dog's ear, finding the familiar scar. "We're not keeping it," he said, the decision crystallizing as he spoke it aloud. "Not like that." The process that followed took months and burned away any illusion that doing good was easy. Ethan contacted a federal oversight office that still answered to laws older than the network Delaney had bragged about. He didn't offer details at first, only enough to bring the right people, quietly. They came in unmarked sedans and left without comment. Paperwork followed, dense and exacting. The bonds were authenticated. A trust was formed. The money moved, not into Ethan's name, but into a purpose. The farm changed by inches and hours. Fences straightened. Kennels rose where fields once lay fallow. The old grain shed became a training hall, its bones reinforced, its secrets sealed for good. Sarah Whitman watched the transformation from the diner window at first, then from the fence line, then finally from the porch as she brought coffee and sandwiches without asking if they were needed. Up close, her presence was steady and practical, tall, slender, auburn hair pulled back when she worked, freckles standing out against wind-chapped skin. She asked questions when they mattered and stayed quiet when they didn't. "You're building something," she said one afternoon, leaning against a post, eyes following Rex as he ran a controlled pattern with a younger dog. "Not just fixing a place." Ethan nodded. "A center, search and rescue, canine first, veterans only." She studied him, then the dogs. "Why here?" "Because this place knows how to survive being forgotten." The first trainees arrived in pairs, handler and dog. They came with injuries you couldn't always see, hands that shook under stress, eyes that tracked exits before faces. One was Marcus Hale, mid-30s, broad-shouldered with a shaved head and a limp he refused to acknowledge. His service had ended after an IED, the blast leaving him short-tempered and hyper-vigilant. He spoke little at first, jaw tight, words rationed like ammunition. His dog, a black Labrador named Scout, was 2 years old and all enthusiasm, glossy coat and hopeful eyes, a counterweight to Marcus's guarded silence. Another was Lena Ortiz, late 20s, compact and strong, hair cropped close, skin marked by old burns along her forearm. She carried herself with quiet intensity, the kind earned in environments where mistakes compounded. Her dog, Nova, a 3-year-old Belgian Malinois with a sharp gaze and endless drive, mirrored her handler's focus. Lena learned quickly. She listened. She trusted the work. Ethan taught without speeches. Mornings began before sunrise. Discipline came first. Routines, checks, respect for the dog's instincts. Rex demonstrated what loyalty looked like when it was earned. He tracked with patience, alerted without drama, waited when waiting mattered. Ethan corrected gently and decisively, never raising his voice, his authority coming from consistency rather than volume. When mistakes happened, and they did, he treated them as data, not failure. The center found its rhythm. The dogs found people worth believing in. The people found something they had thought was gone. On a crisp fall day, the first call came in. A hiker lost in Shenandoah, weather turning. Ethan didn't go. He watched from the fence as Marcus and Scout loaded up, Lena and Nova beside them. Rex sat at Ethan's side, steady, eyes bright. Hours later, the teams returned with a shaken but alive man wrapped in a thermal blanket, gratitude spilling over itself. There were no cameras, no speeches, just work done right. At dusk, Ethan walked the property alone, the mountains blue again, the farm breathing easier. He stopped by the sealed hatch, now marked and secured, a final reminder that beginnings and endings could share a foundation. Rex joined him, pressing close. "We built something better," Ethan said, "not to the past, but to the future." Sarah came up behind them, hands in her jacket pockets. "People are talking," she said softly, "about what this place is now." "Let them," Ethan replied. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound of dogs settling for the night. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the world kept turning, conspiracies aging into irrelevance when starved of secrecy. Ethan rested his hand on Rex's collar, feeling the steady pulse beneath. The farm no one wanted had become a place others needed, not because of money or secrets or power, but because discipline and loyalty, once set to work, could still make something whole.